likely top 500,000 next month. The cases will continue to mount. We didn't get into this mess overnight. It's going to take months for us to turn things around. But let me be equally clear. We will get through this. We will defeat this pandemic.
So you see there, Joe, a lot of expectation setting, trying to prepare the public that these steps will take some time and there will be some hard days ahead, but also trying to unveil some of the tools they can use to make things a bit better. Joe?
Kelly, Dr. Anthony Fauci returned to the White House briefing room for the first time in months. The vibe was definitely different, to say the least. What did he have to say?
Well, Dr. Fauci is the president's medical advisor and will have a more prominent role publicly. He was asked about the difference between standing alongside Donald Trump as president and now the approach here in the Biden White House. And he was candid about the fact that he felt freer to speak about the science and less of a hurdle to deal with having to contradict the president, because President Trump a number of times said things that were not supported by the medical data, or he opined on potential theories or treatments that were not supported by the science. Dr. Fauci, we expect, will be a more regular presence. Here's a sample of some of how he addressed his place in this administration and what he expects going forward.
One of the things that we're going to do is to be completely transparent, open, and honest. If things go wrong, not point fingers, but to correct them, and to make everything we do be based on science and evidence. I mean, that was literally a conversation I had 15 minutes ago with the president. The idea that you can get up here and talk about what you know, what the evidence, what the science is, and know that's it. Let the science speak. It is somewhat of a liberating feeling.
So you get a sense there of how Dr. Fauci feels like he can address some of these issues without repercussions, as he described it. There'll be a lot of tough questions about things like the variation in the virus and how that might affect things. There'll be questions about how the vaccine rollout is going in terms of changes to distribution. So there will be, I'm sure, tough days ahead for Dr. Fauci behind the lectern, but he also is trying to send a message that he will give answers that he believes are based on science and without the pressure of politics. We'll watch that as it goes forward to see how much of a difference there really is. Joe?
All right, Kelly, thank you so much. Former President Trump is starting to strategize his defense for his second Senate impeachment trial. Trump has hired defense attorney Butch Bowers to represent him. Bowers has a track record of representing Republican lawmakers facing legal trouble. He defended former South Carolina Governor Mark Sanford when he faced possible impeachment. Bowers also defended former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley in an ethics probe. Let's bring in NBC News correspondent Leanne Caldwell. So, Leanne, we still don't know when that trial might actually start. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is now pushing to delay the start of the trial. Why is he doing that, and when could we expect to see this get going?
McConnell is proposing to Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer that the trial starts mid-February. Of course, Schumer and McConnell have to come to an agreement on the parameters and when this trial does start. McConnell says the reason is to give the president enough time to mount a defense. He's citing the rushed process in the House of Representatives and that the Senate should have a very thorough trial. And that's the reason he's given. There's a couple of theories as well. One is that perhaps McConnell wants more evidence to come out to make it easier to convict the president. And the other side is perhaps he wants more time to pass so that emotions simmer, so that the president isn't convicted. But either way, McConnell is proposing a trial to start mid-February, but Schumer has not yet agreed.
Yeah, do we know how Democrats feel about this? Has there been any response so far?
Schumer hasn't responded officially, but there are some Democrats who are saying mid-February trial start date could work quite well if Republicans allow the Senate to do the work of confirming Biden's cabinet secretaries and personnel. So there are definitely some discussions going on and no decisions have yet been made.
Another subject, some Democrats brought an ethics complaint that was brought against Republican Senators Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is for what some of these Democrats say was their role in the insurrection, also inciting some of the rioters. And there's a lot of Democrats and even some Republicans who want these two punished. This ethics complaint, what happens when the ethics committee gets a complaint, they can decide to look into it or not. If they do, there will be an investigation, but the ethics committee is quite silent. They don't give a lot of details on what they're doing, but there's still a lot of anger of the roles of Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz.
And Leanne, confirmation hearings for President Biden's cabinet picks are still moving forward. What can we expect today?
Today's going to be a big day, perhaps. The Senate is going to vote first thing in the morning on the president's defense secretary, retired General Austin. And perhaps later today, they might move on to the confirmation vote of Janet Yellen to be Biden's Treasury Secretary. These confirmations are not moving as fast as Democrats would like, but their hope by the end of the week that he'll at least have 3 cabinet officials in place.
And one more question. Llamas or giraffes? What's on your shirt there?
Llamas.
Llamas. Love it.
Llamas Friday.
Llamas on Friday. Leanne, thank you so much. Appreciate all your work this week.
Of course.
Now to the coronavirus pandemic. 1 American is now dying from the virus every 21 seconds. That's 3 deaths a minute. But the U.S. may be seeing some good news in terms of cases. The nation's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, says case numbers are beginning to plateau. As for vaccines, President Biden is invoking the Defense Production Act to speed up the supply chain, promising 100 million Americans will be vaccinated in his first 100 days. The help is needed as more vaccination sites say they are running out of doses. Our correspondents are covering every angle of the pandemic this morning. Let's begin with NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez. Isa, so at least a dozen states are reporting vaccine shortages. They're canceling appointments. What is being done to try and speed up the supply chain?
Yeah, Joe. So like you said, yesterday, President Biden on his second day in office enacted a series of executive orders related to the coronavirus. One of those, and very importantly when we're talking about vaccine shortages, is that he invoked the Defense Production Act in order to ramp up the production of these vaccines. We know that a number of states are reporting shortages, so this is really important right now. Of course, the Defense Production Act is something that former President Trump also invoked earlier in the pandemic to ramp up production in medical supplies, as well as COVID-19 testing components. Here's what Dr. Fauci had to say on the issue yesterday at the White House.
The best case scenario for me is that we'd get 85% of the people vaccinated by the end of the summer. If we do, then by the time we get to the fall, I think we can approach a degree of normality.
Yeah, and on top of that, I mean, here in New York City alone, we're seeing tens of thousands of people having their appointments canceled and rescheduled. All appointments here in New York City that had been scheduled between Thursday, yesterday through Sunday have been scheduled for next week. Although based on what local officials are saying, we're not sure if those appointments will actually follow through next week, given the shortage of supply and this week-to-week situation that vaccine sites are in right now with the shortage.
Isa, I want to ask you about a concerning new statistic from Los Angeles. 1 in 4 people hospitalized with COVID is likely to die. That figure has doubled since the fall. So what are health officials saying is behind this?
Yeah, Joe. So health officials right now are really concerned about a new coronavirus variant that they're seeing, particularly in Southern California. So local researchers at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles released a study this week about this variant, pretty much saying, they don't know whether it's more deadly at this point, but they do think that it's been a large contributing factor in this acceleration of the surge in the region over the last couple of months since mid to late November. So right now we're seeing 35 to 50% of recently diagnosed cases in Los Angeles are this new coronavirus variant. So definitely of concern. Of course, keep in mind as well that these case numbers are going up in Los Angeles and across the region. This week alone, LA County became the first U.S. county to pass 1 million coronavirus cases throughout the pandemic. California became the first state to pass 3 million cases. So definitely something to keep an eye out on as these numbers continue to rise.
So we do have some promising news this morning about coronavirus treatments, especially for people in nursing homes and long-term care facilities. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so drug maker Eli Lilly came out yesterday. They released released a study that was really promising to experts in the medical field because it's the first of its kind that shows that an antibody drug, Eli Lilly's antibody drug, is proven to prevent the risk of contracting coronavirus. So they did this study on over 1,000 residents and staff at, like you said, nursing home locations as well as long-term care facilities. And they found that up to 57% of those folks who received the drug were up to 57% less likely to contract coronavirus. And among residents alone, they were up to 80% less likely to get coronavirus compared to their counterparts who received a placebo. So again, really promising news, particularly for this group of people in this setting who have been hit so hard by the pandemic. As we know, this is a one-time drug dosage, and this is also a drug that has already been used. The FDA authorized emergency usage of this drug starting in mid-November for patients 12 and older who have mild to moderate coronavirus symptoms. But again, if they're able to expand emergency authorization for this drug, now we know that it might help these particularly vulnerable people in these settings from contracting it.
So important to remember, it's not just about the vaccine, but also all of these vital treatments. Isa, thank you so much. America is not alone. The vaccine rollout overseas has hit plenty of road bumps. The World Health Organization is now getting some help from Pfizer to get doses to lower-income countries. NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel joins us now. Richard, good to have you with us this morning. So tell us more about this program and where these vaccine doses will be going.
So there is an international program called COVAX, and it is the plan to push vaccines, not just the Pfizer vaccine, but the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine and others as they come online, to low-income countries. Because the concern is if they don't get it, the cases will just multiply, and the more cases there are, the more likely you're going to have more and more variants popping up. Now, the COVAX program is now starting. A lot of the drugs that are being produced for COVAX are being produced in India. India is now starting to produce drugs for its own population. It's starting to produce vaccines for COVAX, and it is starting to produce some drugs for sale to other governments so they can start distributing to their people. So an international effort to push these vaccines to where they're needed most, because frankly, in Africa, the vaccination program hasn't even begun. So you still have large sections of the world where they are still looking at this problem, wondering when they can begin vaccinations.
Now, Richard, you mentioned India trying to help with the vaccine rollout. Can you tell us more about how that's going to work and what role they're trying to play?
India is a manufacturing hub. Most of the world's vaccines already are produced in India. A lot of pharmaceuticals, generic drugs that people in the United States buy are made in not necessarily in the United States. So India has always been a supplier of pharmaceuticals, and India is going to be producing a huge amount of the Oxford vaccine, for example, and others. So now that they are putting it out to their own people, that was one of the caveats that the drug companies had. They wanted to be able to say that they're servicing the local community at the same time, if not a little bit before, pushing these vaccines out for global distribution. So the global distribution chains, what we're seeing is that they're starting to work. It's starting to move. And critically, the United States, under President Biden, has just joined this program. Former President Trump, didn't want to participate in the international rollout, wanted it to be more America first, even though many health experts were saying, when you're dealing with a pandemic, there is no America first. You have to cure everybody, otherwise the disease keeps circulating, keeps mutating, and keeps getting harder to contain.
Richard, while we have you, let's talk about Portugal. It now has the highest 7-day average of cases in the whole world. So what's happening there, and what kind of restrictions are in place?
Well, they've closed schools there. They're limiting travel between Portugal and here in the UK, and they're blaming it on variants. Portugal is very connected to Brazil. Brazil has a linguistically, historically, culturally, and Brazil has a very aggressive variant that has taken over. South Africa has a variant that is spreading. The UK variant, obviously, is spreading across the United States, and the CDC expects it to be dominant. We were just talking a short while ago about concerns of a California variant. The more virus is out there, the more the chances are that it mutates, and the more the chances are that one of those mutations is favorable for the virus and it catches on and becomes a variant strain.
Richard, appreciate your reporting. Thanks for joining us this morning. Now to the latest on a major lawsuit seeking to dissolve the National Rifle Association. A judge has ruled New York's Attorney General can sue the nonprofit in state court. The decision comes just 1 week after the NRA said it was relocating from New York to Texas, that it was filing for bankruptcy. Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savallo. So Danny, first of all, remind us why New York's Attorney General is suing the NRA and why the judge is allowing this lawsuit to move forward.
A state attorney general is a law enforcement entity like a district attorney or a federal prosecutor, but state attorneys general actually have an additional role often in states, which is they're sort of the watchdog of charitable organizations. So that's what they're doing here. They're essentially suing the NRA because of alleged mismanagement of these nonprofit funds. The NRA is a nonprofit, a charitable organization under New York law, or at least it was. And so for that reason, the Attorney General has the authority to look after these organizations and make sure that they're using the money, the charitable money, properly. And they're alleging that the NRA did not use this money properly. The NRA tried to get this case out of state court and into federal court. That effort has now failed.
Danny, do we know yet what defense we're likely to hear from the NRA?
There isn't. If the case stays in New York State Court, which it will, there isn't much of a defense other than the denying the Attorney General's allegations that they mismanaged funds. So it'll be a defense heavily steeped in accounting-type defenses and coming up with some reason why, hey, we needed this private jet for essential NRA business in order to bring our mugs and our tchotchkes from point A to point B, or whatever the case may be. But that's going to be the primary thrust of their defense, that no, we didn't mismanage funds. This is ordinary course of business, proper for a charity to use the money in this way.
The fact that they're moving to Texas, does that change anything at all when it comes to this kind of suit in New York?
It's an interesting legal castle move, to use a chess analogy. The NRA is trying to say essentially, well, we're no longer a New York corporation, so bye-bye New York, you can't really come after us. We want to go to Texas, where we'll be treated a little better, I imagine. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, and I'm kind of looking into the reasons why, but that's essentially what they're doing. They're saying, bye-bye New York, we're going somewhere where the laws and the jurisdiction is more favorable to us.
All right, Danny Savalos, thanks so much for all your analysis this week. We appreciate it. Time now to take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning. NBC's Sarah Harmon joins us from London. Sarah, good to see you.
Hey, Joe, good to be with you. Happy Friday. Let's start in Japan, where this morning the government says there is no truth to reports about the possible cancellation of the Tokyo Olympics. A government spokesperson this morning is denying that the event will be called off due to COVID. Organizers said all event partners are fully focused on hosting the games this summer. To Australia now, Google is threatening to remove its search engine from the entire country. This is in response to new legislation that would make the tech giant share royalties with news publishers. Australia is introducing a first-in-the-world law that would require tech companies to actually pay media outlets for their news content. It's seen as a global test case for how governments could seek to regulate big tech. Finally, England is on national lockdown. The city of London is basically a ghost town, but after multiple reports of a strong smell coming from the city's financial district, police took a look and discovered a full-blown cannabis factory with more than 800 marijuana plants in a basement near the Bank of England. Joe?
Any idea who got there, or are they still investigating?
It wasn't me. It wasn't me.
I wasn't implying anything. I was implying nothing, Sarah. Good to have you with us. We'll see you in a little bit. Thanks so much. And with that, let's get a check on your morning news now weather. Bill Cairns is with us. Hey, Bill, good morning. Do you know where it came from?
Sarah, a little defensive this morning. We have to investigate that further. Yeah, that and maybe we should just ban Google and maybe see if we can get them to pay us money, right?
Yeah, there you go.
So let's go and try. Yeah, right. So let's check out the weekend forecast. It's going to snow in many places of the country. Many areas that typically expect it, though. It's not unusual. I think next week, and I'll tease ahead a little bit, watch out in the southeast. Again, that's about a week away from now, but I got my eyes on a potential winter storm in areas that don't typically get it. So let's talk about right now, at least, just rain in the southeast. We have a storm coming into California, and that's going to be the storm that's going to move across the country this weekend. I think your eyes immediately go to the Midwest. We haven't had a lot of bone-chilling cold. Today, high temperature. This is in the afternoon, even with sun. 14 in Minneapolis, 19 in Chicago. So that's like a typical winter cold blast coming down. Enjoy the warmth today in New England because tomorrow that cold air heads your way. Look at a little bit of snow also, 21 degrees around Syracuse. Boston doesn't even get above freezing. And then your eyes go out to the west. All that blue is areas of snow throughout much of the Rockies. And then that snowstorm is going to head into the Dakotas and also into Minnesota. We're expecting another snowstorm in Minneapolis. It's been one of the snowier spots this winter. And then on Sunday, now of course, remember, we got a big football game. We got Tom Brady and the Bucs heading to Green Bay to Lambeau Field. It does look like most of the snow will be ending by the time the game starts, but there could be a little bit left, and it will be cold with temperatures in the 20s. So you'll see a little bit of snow, and you'll definitely see a cold football game. And there's also a new storm coming out to the West Coast on Sunday. So we get a little more active in our weather pattern as we go throughout the weekend. And then here's the snowfall forecast over the next 3 days. A little bit of lake effect snow in areas of New York State. That Minneapolis forecast right now, right around 4 inches of snow for Minneapolis, St. Paul. Southern Minnesota could get up to 6 inches, and then many areas of the west, especially the higher elevations, will get a good dose of snow. Be a great weekend for skiing on some fresh powder in areas of the west. So, your friends in Minneapolis, Joe, will, they'll be waking up Sunday morning and doing a little bit of shoveling.
You know what, Bill? Years ago, I covered that NFC Championship game at Lambeau Field when it was like 15 below. Wasn't quite the Ice Bowl, but it was pretty darn close. I was sick for like a week after that. It was so cold. So this is not bad compared to that, right?
No, it'd be interesting to see how Brady and the Bucs do. I mean, Brady's used to it and Gronk, but the rest of the Tampa Bay players in 20-degree temperatures, they haven't seen that in a while.
Yeah, might give the Packers an advantage. We'll see. Bill, thanks so much. Coming up, new video obtained by NBC News shows troops on Capitol Hill sleeping in a parking garage. Why they were left out in the cold and the uproar that quickly followed. Next.
All month long, let's start today. Let's go 2021. Kicking off the new year strong. It's time to take care of you with healthy foods, fitness.
You're incredible.
And how to jumpstart your love life.
Cupid is winning.
So join us and start today.
Make no mistake, what happened that day was an insurrection against the United States government. Is this the beginning of something or the end of something? Should Donald Trump be ostracized from the Republican Party as you know it?
If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
News, the deadly siege on Congress. Lawmakers move to safe locations. There's 2 more weeks left in this presidency. Where is this going? Despite what we've been through, there will be a transfer of power at the U.S. Capitol.
NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
You're watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
Well, we actually saw a large convoy of the National Guard come through here.
It's news made for your streaming world. Live weekdays starting at 6 a.m. Eastern.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
We are a country of laws, a democracy built on free and fair elections, where the majority, not the mob, rules, and no rioter, no act of insurrection or domestic terror, no desperate despot can take away all we have built, all that we stand for, and all we hold dear.
In the news this morning, the FBI is now offering a $75,000 reward for information that leads to the arrest and conviction of anyone responsible for those pipe bombs found in D.C. on January 6th. Federal investigators released this notice with a picture from the day and details of the event. The two explosive devices, which were found outside the Republican and Democratic National Committee headquarters, were defused by experts. A representative for Dustin Diamond says the actor has completed his first round of chemotherapy for stage 4 lung cancer. More chemo will follow, and Diamond will soon begin physical therapy. The manager for the Saved by the Bell star announced last week that the 44-year-old had been diagnosed with cancer. And you still have time to buy a ticket for tonight's Mega Millions jackpot, which is now an astounding $970 million. The cash payout option, $716.3 million. Your odds, though, are still about 1 in 300 million. So good luck. With any luck, we don't have to keep reading these stories and someone will win. All right, moving on. When images surfaced last night showing National Guard troops sleeping in a parking garage, outrage quickly followed. These are the very troops that were tasked with keeping the inauguration safe and secure. The uproar reached angry senators. Before long, the troops were allowed back into the Capitol. This video, first obtained by NBC News, shows the troops leaving the Thurgood Marshall Judicial Center garage and heading back to sleep inside the Capitol building. NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delanian joins us now. So Ken, what happened here? Do we know if someone made them sleep in the parking garage? What's the story?
Joe, it looks like it's coming back to the Capitol Police, as if they don't have enough to answer for after the security failures on January 6th. I have emailed the Capitol Police spokeswoman this morning, have not gotten a response, but the reporting is that the Capitol Police asked these National Guard members to leave their place where they were staying in the Capitol because there's increased foot traffic now that things are starting to reopen, and sent them to this parking garage where they were breathing exhaust fumes and potentially exposed to coronavirus. Now look, I've been embedded with U.S. troops. They've probably slept in worse places than a parking garage, but nonetheless, the images of these people who protected the U.S. Capitol having to do that, sleep on the hard ground, did not go over well. Senators expressed outrage, and they are now vacating that space and going back to a different, more accommodating facility.
Which is good to hear, and we'll see if there's any more investigating into what exactly happened here. Speaking of Capitol Police, Ken, they're investigating a potential gun incident involving a Republican congressman. What do we know about that?
His name is Andy Harris. He is the only Republican from the Maryland congressional delegation. He represents part of the Eastern Shore, and he was stopped at a magnetometer, apparently trying to bring a handgun onto the floor of the House, which is prohibited. Now, Harris, his office said in a statement that he has been threatened and he carries a weapon for his protection, and that he has a license in Maryland to do that. And members of Congress are allowed to carry unloaded guns around the facility. But it just underscores the concerns that some people have that some of these Republicans are toting weapons around the Capitol. And the idea that someone would try to bring a gun on the House floor so close to this horrific insurrection that happened is just really disturbing to a lot of people. Andy Harris is not a dumb person. He is an anesthesiologist and a military veteran, but the judgment here is highly questionable.
And one more thing, Ken. President Biden is sticking with Christopher Wray as FBI director. We should know this is pretty normal. This is shouldn't be a surprise, but what can you tell us about the decision?
is normal. And Joe Biden is doing this, I am told, because he wants to restore the independence of the FBI director, who is supposed to serve a 10-year term, to give him a modicum of distance from the executive branch. But there have been concerns raised about Wray, that he didn't push forcefully enough against the horrible things that Trump said and did regarding the FBI. He didn't say anything after the Capitol riots for many days. But the Biden folks overcame those concerns. And I've spoken to members of Congress and congressional staff who behind the scenes say Wray has been solid during the Trump years, at least according to them. And Biden has decided to keep him on as the FBI director.
Lots to cover this morning, Ken Delaney, and thanks so much for helping us out. Now, the Biden administration wants an overhaul of the U.S. immigration system. The White House will send a bill to Congress, including a pathway to citizenship for hundreds of thousands of dreamers. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki explained why at yesterday's daily briefing.
The last 4 years, the immigration policy has been based around funding for a wall. That has not worked, even to keep the country safer, even to keep bad actors out. And so his approach is multi-pronged.
NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley joins us now. So, Julia, these plans are quite detailed. Can you help break them down for us?
Well, Joe, we haven't seen the exact text of the legislation yet, but yesterday, Senator Bob Menendez, who will be the person introducing this bill in the Senate, did give a briefing where he laid out some of these details. And a lot of it is focused on children. As we know, children were some of those most affected by the Trump administration policies that curbed asylum. They want to allow children to be in more humane conditions. As we know, there were at least 7 children who died in detention under the Trump administration, migrant children. They also want to allow children to apply for refugee status and asylum in their home countries. They want families to have alternatives to detention so that they're not kept in detention centers while they await their asylum hearings. And they also want a path to citizenship for dreamers. As of course are those people affected by DACA. Their status was in question so many times during the Trump administration. They did make it through, and now this legislation would give them a more permanent fix. So you would see hundreds of thousands of dreamers on a fast track to citizenship. They could qualify within 3 years and they could get a green card immediately. And then for the estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States now, they could also see a path to citizenship where they would be eligible within 8 years. We also see a fast track for citizenship for people with temporary protected status. Those are some people who may have come when there was an emergency in their country, like a natural disaster, and for certain farm workers. They've laid out certain categories they want to protect, and this is all under the umbrella of trying to make it a path that's either more humane for people who are arriving at the border, or a way to have people who have been living here, paying their taxes, or at least want to pay their taxes, to give them a path to citizenship. But it's a hard thing to try to get passed right now. You know, you've got a Senate that's split 50-50, and Senator Bob Menendez said that they would need at least 9 Republicans to sign on to this, and that could be a tough hill to climb.
Julia, can you help us understand which of these go back to Obama-era policies and which of these just erase Trump-era policies and changes?
Well, a lot of the executive actions are just to immediately erase Trump-era policies, and that was pretty easy for Joe Biden to do because so many of the policies of the Trump administration had been executive actions in the first place. The Trump-era policy trying to fortify DACA, of course, that was started under Obama. That's one thing they'll be going back to. The other piece is this idea of the Central American Minors Program, and it's probably something you haven't heard of, Joe. It's not very well known, but this is something that was started under the Obama administration, where children could apply for asylum in their home countries. That keeps them from having to make that incredibly dangerous journey, often by foot, often hanging on to crowded trains to try to get to the United States, and they are often taken advantage of by cartels and smugglers. This is to give them a safer path to apply for asylum. That was started under the Obama administration, canceled in August 2017 by Trump, but this bill would bring that back.
All right, Julia Ainsley, thanks so much for helping us understand all of these new policy proposals. We appreciate it. The Biden administration also wants to extend one of the most important arms treaties in the world, the one with Russia. It actually expires February 5th, and the White House is proposing 5 more years. But we're talking about the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or New START. It limits how many deployed nuclear warheads and missiles each country can have. NBC News reporter Matt Bodner joins us now from Moscow. Matt, good to see you. So could you explain to us more about what this proposal is and whether the Kremlin is on board?
Thanks, Joe. Well, unfortunately, we still don't know very many details about the proposal itself. And it doesn't seem that Russia has actually seen anything official either. But we have heard from several Russian officials this morning, senior lawmakers, and even the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, and they're all saying more or less the same thing. Russia's position is unchanged. They very much welcome this initiative from the White House, but they want an unconditional 5-year extension. And really just based on the tone of this discussion during the campaign and so on, it looks as if that's probably what they will get. And so there's really no reason to think at this point that if that shows up perhaps in Moscow today, that the Kremlin is preparing to rebuff the administration on this one.
Matt, let's look at the larger picture. What can you tell us about the relationship between Presidents Biden and Putin? They're not strangers to each other. This is not their first time together on the world stage. But what is that relationship like?
Well, it's not really one full of warmth. They're certainly familiar with each other, and from Putin's perspective, when he looks at Biden, he probably sees a Russia hawk, somebody who's a friend of Ukraine, and really doesn't see a lot of hope for the kind of warmth that he might have expected from the previous administration. And I think it's really interesting and important to note that the Biden administration is actually the first that I can think of in recent memory that is coming into office without any kind of platform or specific promise to try to reforge or refresh relations with Russia in any way. Instead, they seem to be approaching a more pragmatic, for lack of a better word, approach. And that can be summed up as work with Russia where you can. I think New START is a good example of that. But also confront Russia where the administration thinks that it needs to. And I think that the first sign of that we're going to see is actually coming up very soon. And that concerns the fate of the imprisoned opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, who's currently in jail right now.
Yeah, Matt, let me ask you more about that. You've been following the story all week. So remind us, why did he return to Russia? And then what is next in this part of the story?
This is a question everyone's been asking themselves since he first woke up from that coma a few months ago after the alleged assassination attempt, and said straight up that he's coming back when he's healed. And it's a question everyone continued to ask last week as he flew back and was promptly arrested at the border. So right now he faces about 3.5 years in prison from various legal charges, and he's calling for mass protests this week. And so I think in his own words, he said he came back to show Putin that he is not afraid. But it has become clear in the past few days, he's really back to force what might be his final confrontation with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He faces at least 3 years, possibly up to 10, we're hearing, and he's calling now on protesters to hit the streets tomorrow to rally for his freedom. So we'll see what happens tomorrow, but the stakes have probably never been higher for him, at least in terms of protest actions.
Matt Bodner, we know you'll stay on it. Thanks so much for joining us from Moscow this morning. We appreciate it. President Biden is pressing on with his $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill dubbed the American Rescue Plan. But with a 50-50 Senate, this is far from a done deal. Here's NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Rule.
You know, if I'm here, that means it is time to talk business and money, and Joe Biden certainly needs to focus on both. His first full day as president was a reminder that our economy is in trouble. News that 900,000 people filed for unemployment benefits for the first time just last week, which now means over 16 million Americans are getting some form of overall benefits. Unfortunately, this is not a surprise. COVID is the source. COVID is our boss. And as COVID cases go up and spread across this country, state by state, we're seeing harsher restrictions put on businesses, and that means more people are being laid off. Joe Biden and his administration are aware you cannot have an economic recovery until you address the health crisis, which is why there is a huge plan for more vaccinations to be rolled out. His stimulus plan, his recovery plan, has a huge price tag, $1.9 trillion, which is staggering at its face. But as Janet Yellen said, unless we do something major, we're likely going to face another recession.
Former Former President Donald Trump is still banned from Twitter for good, and it looks like there's nothing he can do about it. Now, whatever your views on his tweets, the extraordinary situation has led to questions about the enormous power big tech has in our democracy and the lack of legal challenges to that power. NBC News reporter Aiza Garcia-Hodges joins us now. So you report, quote, there are few, if any, legal challenges to the power Twitter and other tech companies wield. Why is that? Why did we get here?
Essentially, it's the novelty of them, right? The current legislation, according to legal experts that we spoke to, just isn't on par with a lot of these companies and a lot of the reach that they have. And so there are few ways legally to kind of, temper their ability to moderate content. The First Amendment doesn't do it because they're private companies. Section 230, which allows them to not be held liable for much of the content on their sites, doesn't really do it. And antitrust legislation, as of right now, the way that it's currently interpreted, also doesn't really rein in their ability to moderate content.
We've heard from the CEOs of Facebook, Twitter, Google, and others on Capitol Hill. What does Congress say about tech oversight, something that many predict we could be seeing more of here with the Biden administration?
So a lot of these companies are under antitrust scrutiny at the moment and are also facing challenges to Section 230, which again protects them from being held liable for a lot of the user-generated content on their platforms. So there is a bipartisan push at the moment to kind of try to, rein in some of that power and try to figure out how they can be regulated. Again, it's still being determined, it's still being developed, and as it stands right now, much of it doesn't focus on specifically their moderation power, their power to moderate content.
And Aiza, what do legal experts say about the future of regulating these tech companies?
So essentially what they say is that either antitrust regulation as it currently stands needs to be broadened to be interpreted in a way that can kind of, encompass some of those moderation efforts, or Section 230 needs to be not so much repealed, but reformed, and so that it would be interpreted in a different way, and so that it would look at some of their ability to kind of control what content makes it and stays online.
All right, Aiza, thanks so much. I appreciate your reporting.
Thank you.
Coming up, vaccination rates among African Americans remain staggeringly low, particularly in Pennsylvania. Why the situation there is so dire. Next.
Let's start today.
Let's go 2021.
Kicking off the new year strong. It's time to take care of you with healthy foods, fitness,
You're incredible.
and how to jumpstart your love life.
Cupid is winning.
So join us and start today.
Make no mistake, what happened that day was an insurrection against the United States government. Is this the beginning of something or the end of something? Should Donald Trump be ostracized from the Republican Party as you know it?
If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Siege on Congress. Lawmakers move to safe locations. There's 2 more weeks left in this presidency. Where's this going? Despite what we've been through, there will be a transfer of power at the U.S. Capitol.
NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
You're watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
But we actually saw a large convoy of the National Guard come through here.
It's news made for your streaming world. Live weekdays starting at 6 a.m. Eastern.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
We are a country of laws, a democracy built on free and fair elections, where the majority, not the mob, rules, and no rioter, no act of insurrection or domestic terror, no desperate despot can take away all we have built, all that we stand for, and all we hold dear.
A concerning new report suggests that black Americans are being vaccinated at lower rates than white Americans. The analysis by Kaiser Health News found that the most dramatic case is in Pennsylvania, where only 0.3% of black Pennsylvanians had been vaccinated compared to 1.2% of white individuals there. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson joins us now from Leah Corris Center at Temple University in Philadelphia. So Priscilla, let's start with these numbers from Kaiser Health News. What are the reasons for the low vaccination rates among black Americans?
Well, Joe, good morning. That Kaiser Health analysis found that there were two driving factors in these disparities that we're seeing. One of them being a mistrust in the health system because of structural racism. And the other, of course, is access, something that we've been talking a lot about over the past several weeks. And already we're seeing folks who are working to address that. We heard Joe Biden earlier this week promising to unveil a public education sort of campaign in order to get the word out that these vaccines are safe and effective. And across the country, we've heard from lawmakers in Washington, D.C., and Texas having conversations about how to equitably distribute this vaccine, whether that means targeting communities of color specifically or targeting zip codes that have been hardest hit by this virus. And why is that important? Public health officials are saying that when we look at this data and we see that Black, Native American, and Hispanic Americans are dying at a rate 3 times that of white Americans, if there is not vaccinations focused on those communities, those disparities will only continue to grow at a time when they should be coming lower because this vaccine is available. Joe?
Priscilla, let's talk about where you are. You're outside of a vaccination site that's trying to close that gap. Tell us who's running it and how they're trying to get shots in eligible arms.
Yeah, Joe, in just a few hours, these doors are going to open and folks who have those appointments will be able to come in and get the vaccine. But this isn't a site that's hosted by the state or the county. It's actually run by a group called the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium. And it was founded by Dr. Ayla Stanford last spring when we began to see disparities in testing in different communities, and particularly Black communities. And now she's turning her focus to vaccinations. And so this is the 4th clinic that they are going to be running. They started their first clinics last weekend and really working to target communities of color and zip codes that have been very heavily impacted and to get those folks vaccinated to help close that gap, Joe.
And Priscilla, supply and demand has been a huge problem throughout the vaccine rollout. So how many people are they hoping to vaccinate, and why is it so hard trying to hit that target?
That's right. That's an issue here as well. So this is, as I mentioned, the 4th clinic. They get around 500 vaccines per clinic. So today they'll be able to vaccinate. Ideally, they'll have vaccinated 2,000 people across the 4 clinics that they have held. But the issue is that 12,000 people have already signed up, registered to receive vaccines here since the registration form opened 2 weeks ago. And so at that rate, this site wouldn't be able to get through all of those people for another 12 weeks. And that's only the people who have signed up in the first 2 weeks. And so Dr. Stanford is requesting more doses of the vaccine, trying to see if she can get 1,500 or even 750 per site. She's looking at expanding and operating more sites. But of course, these dosages ultimately come from the state, and it's based on what they're getting from the federal government. And so Stanford says her hope is that ultimately the Biden administration will be able to do something more, and they'll be able to get more vaccines as a result of the work that is happening at the federal level. Joe?
All right, Priscilla, thank you so much. Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor, Dr. Natalie Azar. So, Dr. Azar, let's talk about that statistic that Priscilla just mentioned. It's worth repeating. CDC data shows that Black Americans are dying at a rate 3 times that of white Americans. How concerned are you then about these early vaccination numbers and the disparities that we're seeing?
Well, Joe, I'm certainly concerned about it. I certainly also cannot say that I am surprised. You know, Priscilla laid out very accurately the two main driving forces here. One is access, of course, and the other is, you know, mistrust in the medical community, and for good reason. You know, I need not mention Tuskegee and Henrietta Lacks as two examples of how this has bred this structural racism in this country. I think what's important is to understand that in terms of educating the communities of color about the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine, it really has to come from a source that is trusted. And the more familiar the source and the more familiar the outreach, the more likely it is to resonate. You know, it's also important not just to acknowledge that this is an issue, but to understand why. You know, are there conspiracy theories? Is it a concern about fertility? Is it a concern that this is a new vaccine platform? You have to understand why people are reluctant, you know, in addition to just general mistrust, in order to address those issues, Joe.
Dr. Fauci is hosting an event with Black community leaders in Baltimore this afternoon. Does this type of outreach make a difference, and what else can be done to fix this problem on a national scale?
You know, I think, of course, it's helpful, and I applaud the administration for really trying to take a bite out of this problem from the get-go. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, however. And while we all feel, you know, in the medical community that we have immense trust in Dr. Fauci, you know, he may not be the right spokesperson for communities of color all across this country. You know, there's this association called the National Medical Association, which is a professional society of African Americans that was established in the late 1900s because Black American doctors were excluded from the American Medical Association. They actually created their own in-house FDA, if you will, in September to vet treatments for COVID-19, and they have endorsed the vaccines. So as Priscilla was saying, in addition to this newer group that was established, we also, I think, are going to need to rely on, you know, these sort of pillars in the African American community to really, you know, this resonates with African Americans.
Dr. Azar, let's talk more about the concerns over supply. What would you tell eligible people who haven't been able to get vaccinated yet or have had their appointments pushed back?
You know, Joe, I think that we need to acknowledge that the initial goals in terms of vaccines, you know, supply was aspirational. It was very ambitious, and frankly, it was a little bit misleading. What I would say to folks is that they need to sit tight for the next few weeks. I think we're going to see a dramatic change once we have, you know, triggered the appropriate federal resources, FEMA and the DPA. I think we'll see supply increase. I think we'll see distribution, you know, more streamlined, and folks will be able to roll up their sleeves and get the vaccine. I really think there was a tremendous, you know, disservice that in terms of this mismatch in expectations. We need to set them realistically. People will get their vaccines. It will just take a little longer than we anticipated.
All right. We appreciate all of your advice and guidance, Dr. Azar. Thanks so much. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Jim.
States all over the country are struggling with their vaccine rollouts, but over in West Virginia, they're actually having a lot of success. NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett shows us what they're doing differently.
Without a federal system in place for vaccine administration, each state is doing it a little differently. But some states, like West Virginia, are having better results than others.
We don't have vaccines in a warehouse sitting on a shelf. We've got them in people's arms.
West Virginia is topping the charts with one of the best per capita vaccine rates in the country. It's also near the top of the list of states administering a high rate of doses distributed to them. But how exactly are they doing it? For one, they're focusing on high-risk populations first. The state was the first in the country to complete first-round vaccinations in nursing homes and long-term care facilities. But there was another strategy they used.
Our great National Guard and all of our health officials and everything came up with an idea to basically recruit all the local pharmacies.
Our state is very unusual in that Walgreens and CVS are not nearly as well distributed across all of our state. Half of our pharmacies in West Virginia are independently owned, and we organized over 200 pharmacies in a network that could reach people not only in the population centers that we have, but in the rural communities as well.
That was something that we were not going to be able to have if we had activated the federal pharmacy partnership early on, because we knew that there was at least a 2-week delay with the federal pharmacy partnership.
This worked well initially, but officials soon realized they needed to change course.
We had to make a really big pivot and everything, a pivot away from really going with the Walgreens and the CVS to going with our National Guard.
At least 16 states have activated the National Guard to assist with vaccinations. President Biden plans to deploy both FEMA and the National Guard nationwide to help increase vaccination numbers across the board.
By the end of our first month in office, we will have 100 federally supported centers across the nation that will ultimately vaccinate millions of people.
When it comes to the number of doses distributed, West Virginia has received roughly 200,000 doses. This is significantly less than larger, more populous states like Texas and California, who have received 2 and 3 million doses each, respectively. Fewer doses to divvy out means less of an organizational headache, but West Virginia's vaccination rate is impressive nonetheless. Now that the state is wrapping up their first round of vaccinations, they're ready for more.
So now what we need in West Virginia, we need more vaccines.
Biden's post-inauguration plans include invoking the Defense Production Act to rapidly expand vaccine manufacturing, but organization will remain challenging.
Whether it's an American in West Virginia or California or Pennsylvania, if we can get a shot in the arm, we got a real chance of saving somebody's life.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah has the day off. Right now on Morning News Now, plan of attack. President Biden rolling out new executive orders overnight as his administration ramps up its fight against coronavirus. The focus of that plan and the major changes for everyday Americans aimed at keeping you safe. Congressional disapproval. Republican lawmakers already slamming President Biden's agenda. From impeachment to immigration, what GOP leaders are saying about the administration's first days in office. Grim outlook, a sobering assessment of what the future of the pandemic holds. Some scientists are saying needs to be done to slow its spread. 6 months to go, the Tokyo Olympics still on after speculation the games had been canceled. How athletes are getting ready and what the main event might look like in the era of COVID. And a billion reasons lottery players clutching their Mega Millions tickets in hopes of matching tonight's drawing. The odds you've got to beat to walk away with that cash. We begin with President Joe Biden taking more executive actions overnight in the fight against coronavirus, this time focused on the economic fallout from restrictions and closures. The president signed several orders yesterday, zeroing in on vaccinations and testing. President Biden warns, however, it's going to get worse before it gets better, with 500,000 deaths predicted by next month. Let's get right to NBC News White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly, let's begin with that breaking news from overnight. President Biden rolling out 2 new orders providing economic relief. It's all part of what he's calling a wartime effort to fight the pandemic. Tell us more about that.
Well, good morning, Joe. We will see a lot of these actions over about a 10-day period or so, where the Biden administration is trying to address key priorities and to do it with executive actions. And so what part of is happening now is we've seen the COVID approach dealing with things like vaccines and the medical side of it, if you will. Economics is a focus today, where the president wants to have some steps that will help ease some of the economic burden. That includes things like directing the Treasury Department to seek out those Americans who have not yet received their direct cash payments that were signed into law, and to try to make an effort to get that money to them. There are a number of reasons why that could happen, where people don't have sign up with direct deposit, have not been filing a tax return, those kinds of things, where they want to get that money there. There's also an effort to make it easier for frontline workers in different fields that have been unable to step away from the workplace with concerns about COVID, unable to get unemployment benefits, and to change that. So if there are workers who believe their workplace is unsafe, that they could not go to work but still qualify for unemployment benefits. Those are some of the ideas that are a part of this plan to try to protect people economically, to try to take steps that will improve and speed vaccinations. Each of these is a step in what will be a multi-day effort by the Biden administration to change some of the priorities based on what was happening with the previous administration, and to look for ways where they can take steps that could have impact on workers and on the public as quickly as possible. Legislation is coming as well that will be sorted out by Congress, but these are the things President Biden can do directly. To give you a sense of what he's thinking about all of this, here is President Biden talking about these concerns.
Our national strategy is comprehensive. It's based on science, not politics. It's based on truth, not denial, and it's detailed.
And we'll expect to see the president again today as he continues this effort to try to reshape the country's approach. Joe?
Kelly, Republicans are already pushing back against the president's orders. What are they saying?
Well, this is what we should expect to see a lot of, and that is now Republicans as the opposition party trying to chip away at some of these proposals. Among the concerns, getting money into the hands of people who have not been as directly affected. For example, additional stimulus checks or direct payments that the Biden administration supports, even for those who have not suffered any kind of a work loss. Here is some of what you'll be hearing from Republicans based on some of these concerns.
The president can and should refocus his administration on creating good-paying American jobs.
We have to get serious about how we're spending taxpayer dollars. We already have more than $27 trillion in federal debt.
So some Republicans are saying it's too soon for another relief package, now expressing concerns about the deficit. Obviously, during the Trump administration, some of them had different views. We'll see some of that tension playing out of what kinds of steps are needed and where to target the kind of relief and support. There will likely be what are historically big differences among the two parties in how to do that. Democrats are saying that it's time to send more relief to more people to try to help the economy and to alleviate some of the economic hardship that many have been experiencing. Joe?
Kelly, Dr. Anthony Fauci is back at the White House. He's now serving as chief medical advisor to the president. What did he have to say about the new strategy and the new administration?
Well, we can expect to see more of Dr. Fauci, and at times during the Trump period, he was